So I was trying to think when I first came here, what's the good that I can do for you all? And that's something that we should all strive for constantly, is what good can we do in our lives. So we're going to start out with a question, and the question to you all is, what did you want to be when you grew up? If you guys all think for a minute, when you were kids, what did you want to do? Okay, so here's the next question. Are you anywhere near where you thought you were going to be? Are you heading in that direction? How many of you are anywhere near what you thought you were interested in being? I can't see, I'm blind up here. Which one? All right. So Tim told you a little bit about myself. This is what I wanted to be when I grew up. I really oscillated between these three figures of Mother Teresa, Henry David Thoreau, and being a jet fighter pilot. Particularly one who was flying an 88B Hawker Harrier, the ones that jump jets that go straight off the ground. So clearly I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to be, but I think I've incorporated different elements of that. So here's another question for you, and this is a little bit more cheesy, but I want you all to shut your eyes, and I was going to say that I can see you all up here, but I actually can't, so I don't know who's cheating. But shut your eyes and think about, when you think of nature, when you envision nature, what do you see? So just take a minute. Okay, can somebody give me an example? What do they see? Okay. How about somebody else? All right. How about let's do two more. Okay, one more.
The Garden of Eden.
The Garden of Eden. All right. So how many people had people in the picture? Raise your hands. So look around. That's a pretty small minority, right? How many people had buildings in the picture? Any other human-made element? Okay, so pretty small, right? What's interesting is I've done this every single time over the years that I talk to people, and it's amazing. It's invariably less than probably 10% of the audience has humanity in the picture when they think of nature at all. And it's a particular challenge, obviously, if you're trying to get people to understand that we are a part of nature, that we don't often think of it that way. And historically, over the period of environmental education, environmental awareness, people are always set up to see evil as, right? We're not actually part of it. And what we do a lot personally and at PIPS is really try to get people to understand that that's all right, it's good we are here. Just like the president said, we're stewards of the environment. We're also part of the environment. The majority of people, this is the nature that they're going to see now, right? The majority of people live in a built environment. And the nature that they see isn't necessarily out there. It's not the great wilderness areas. A lot of people aren't going to be blessed to necessarily see those things. And so the story that I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to combine these two elements, these questions of really trying to change people's conception of what nature is and also finding your way in life, what you're supposed to be when you grow up. And I know that you guys are all disciplines across the board, and what's great about that, though, is humanity is a myriad of disciplines, right? We're all connected. There are so many different ways of knowing the world. And if we're really going to heal the relationship between humanity and environment, we need to also look back at ourselves and understand humanity, not just focus on environmental issues and think that we're not part of the picture. So if we jump back to this concept, right, the president said again, is that there are huge environmental problems out there, and I don't need to spend the time talking about them because I think you probably hear them enough. But, it's really correlated with the fact that most people don't live in a way that's really connected much to nature. We live very much in built environments. We don't necessarily see the Arctic, we don't get to see the rainforests. And it's not just environmental issues that are correlated with this problem, but it's a lot of human health issues, right? A lot of people, you can talk about obesity, et cetera, psychological well-being. And you also now increasingly have the problem of people really being disconnected from the environment, where anywhere from very young children to adults are spending the majority of their waking hours in front of a screen, not even necessarily interacting with each other. And we have a lot of problems, so we can't just focus simply on environmental issues. We need to also be looking at humanity, and everybody has a role in being able to help with that issue. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself, finding my way, because I've found that it serves as an inspiration for other people as well. So I am not from a family of environmentalists. I'm not from a family of scientists. I'm actually the third oldest of 12 children, from a very conservative family. I was a free lunch program kid. I didn't have many opportunities at all. And I grew up in New Hampshire, but I grew up in the dirty old mill town of Manchester, New Hampshire. And so, yeah, there were a lot of small-scale nature that you could essentially see. I didn't get to go skiing. I didn't get to do any of that sort of stuff. And it was always funny. I was drawn to the beauty of that nature, and that's really what led me into science. My father he was the first generation in his family to go to college, and he pushed through and he got a doctorate in philosophy and a doctorate in literature. My mother never went to college. She loved art, she loved reading, but she died when I was pretty young, so I don't remember her very well. But those were things that I grew up in this very small, cramped house with a whole bunch of kids, reading, Plato, Aristotle, looking at art books, listening to classical music. And I was really moved by the other disciplines, essentially, that were out there outside of science, but I also really saw the beauty in the nature that was right around me. And it was a high school biology teacher, and truly, teachers are so critically important in people's lives. They really, really are. It's amazing how much they affect you. And he was able to help his students start observing the world that was right around them, what was in their backyards. And it was amazing to focus people's attention to say, you know what, you can have this very small plot of land, but there is a whole myriad of life, teeming life going on in there. And I was also acutely aware of the suffering that went on, because yeah, we didn't have much food. You can think about the amount of food that goes around, right? My husband also was homeless most of his life. And so he essentially, how many of you have read Grapes of Wrath? A lot of you, right? So it's like Grapes of Wrath, a little bit more modern day, but, had jail, drugs, violence, you name it in there. And so we really came from and his family didn't go to high school even. So we came from a very non-traditional choir, and what I still find today, and I found that I have a role, is that a lot of environmentalists is still in-your-face environmentalism. If you don't buy Prius, you're not doing any good for the world. If you're not buying local, organic, expensive food, you're not doing any good for the world. And I've always found that we need to step back and say, wait, who is the audience that we're looking at? What are the issues that are their problem? What are they dealing with? What are their viewpoints? And so again, stepping back and saying, all right, what are the things that I can relate to this person about? Or if I have artistic skills, how can I connect to different audiences without just saying, you're wrong, or throwing lots of science facts at them? So that's what we really try to do at FIPS. So for me, I was really excited about the beauty of nature. That's what got me into it. It was this solace of, alleviating suffering that was going on, and it truly was beauty that brought me there. And so from high school age through undergrad, graduate school, teaching, etc., until I got to FIPS, this was the kind of path that I led. So one of the big things I want to say is you don't necessarily have to know what you want to do with your life. It's amazing that you would be 18, 19, 20 and know what you wanted to be. For all you know, it doesn't even exist out there. There's so many environmental problems right now, problems with humanity. The job that your skills would be useful for might not exist. It requires creativity. It requires cross-disciplinary thinking to really help with these issues. So Tim already let you know what I'm doing here. I'm still working on my PhD right now, but I'm specifically working in environmental psychology research and looking at how people interact with nearby nature. But this is the kind of stuff I did. I did all sorts of field work. I worked on Alcatraz, looked at bird population behavior, camped out in the desert for months at a time, looking at small mammal habitat fragmentation. I was up in Michigan looking at microsatellite DNA, and along the way trying to find my way. Married, had 2 kids, and they got to grow up doing that sort of stuff as well, and even involved in the scientific process. I taught all along the way. I was really trying to figure out how can I give back to the environment, how can I give back to people. So I started teaching graduate courses with teachers, and how can you teach inquiry? How can you get them to start observing the world that's around them with their children? And still struggling to find out, well, this isn't really working. I'd have so many science advisors say, Molly, what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to be a teacher? Do you want to be a researcher? And I'd say, I don't know, I really don't know. And so I started doing photography. And the reason I started doing that, because it came back to years later thinking, I'm still not connecting back to what really drew me into this in the first place, and I don't think I'm connecting back to people. And so I focused on the nature on the sidewalk, and what was crazy was in the course of 6 months, I think it was, I was discovered by the organizers of the Sundance Film Festival, and they presented me as one of 7 emerging female artists from around the country. I'm thinking, this is great. I'm finally figuring out that for years I've been struggling to try to get people to understand that they are part of nature. Nature is right here. And yet it was through art that I started getting people's attention. And so it's been exciting because it has enabled me to work in advisory capacity and have some very good friends now that are top name National Geographic photographers. I work with them with the organization, the International League of Conservation Photographers, that focuses on critical environmental issues that are happening around the globe. But yet we're able to correspond and me really focus on city-related issues where they're working on the wilderness issues. And it's been a very, very exciting process. But what it's all come down through as I struggled was ultimately, what is the point of education? When we are teaching students about science knowledge, when we're teaching them environmental stuff, when we're teaching them politics, art, philosophy, ultimately, what is the point of what you're learning, right? And the bottom line is it's sensitivity to life. And this is a great quote by a horticulturalist, just happens to be. But that's really what it is, and it's not just sensitivity to human life, it's to non-human life. And that's a great driving force for what we do at Phipps now. And what's great about being able to work in a city, so where I'm at now, is we have the opportunity, and specifically working with plants, is we have lots of people around us. Lots of people around us that might not ever see the large-scale wilderness that's out there. But we also focus specifically on plants, and plants are this ability to have, they're ubiquitous, right? Plants, like insects, essentially, are things, they're opportunities, they're small points of nature where you can teach somebody about the small-scale nature that's around them. Even with squirrels, even though squirrels are pretty common in cities now, those things can run away. Plants are these trapped things. You can say, hey, let's look at the beauty of the plants. Let's learn about how amazing these plants are that work. So this is where I'm at. So as Tim said, I'm the Director of Science Education and Research there. And what Phipps is about is, it's great. It's evolved over the years. Tim mentioned that it was started at the height of the Industrial Revolution in Pittsburgh. So my question to you first is, how many of you have been to Pittsburgh? Okay, decent number. I hadn't been to Pittsburgh until about 3.5 years ago, and all of my life I thought, why would anybody ever want to go to Pittsburgh? It is the dirty old mill town that people had talked about my place growing up. And I was amazed when I first saw it. And yes, it is an environmental center, and I think one of the most exciting things about working in a city, in a place like Pittsburgh particularly, is it's got a past, right? And it has to, it's almost like we're going for atonement now. And it's more exciting to be able to say, we have these historical problems that we need to now overcome, versus just going out saying, scrap the city, we're going to start something brand new. And so it's a wonderful process, because it's not just saying that everything that humans did in the past was wrong. It's saying, okay, we built beautiful glass houses like that because we thought they were beautiful, but we also understand that they weren't environmentally responsible at the time. What we try to do with that is to try to preserve the historical components of the past, understand that we were motivated by beauty then, but how can we make that to be more environmentally responsible now? So we're going to talk a little bit about buildings, and this talk was a challenge in some ways because it's really about finding your way, but it's also about some really neat stuff that's going on in the green building industry. So with green buildings, typically, these are the types of things that you shoot for. So you're really trying to reduce, to jump back to this for a sec, this is not exactly an energy efficient building, just so you know, in case you thought about it. A Victorian glass house that's stuck in a climate that typically is gray and cold, and you're trying to grow tropical plants year round. So trying to go from that, right, without just scrapping the building, you know, you're dealing with a historic site, and trying to make it be environmentally relevant is a big challenge. So these are the things that we shoot for. These are typical green building stacks where you're really, ideally, a well-done green building is supposed to reduce the amount of energy, the CO2 emissions, the use of water, and then the solid waste it's producing. So with Phipps, you saw a picture earlier, it's a fairly large landscape. It's not that large. It's a whole bunch of plants under glass. So it's the third largest glass conservatory in the country. And it's essentially 2.5 acres under glass. And so it's a very big greenhouse. And we've got a little bit of land beyond that. But over the last decade, we've had this 3-phase plan of how we're going to preserve the beauty of this place and the historical factors of it, but also make it responsible. So we started out with the front part, which was the Welcome Center. So in 2005, this is what the Welcome Center used to look like. They poured gas, they stuck a 60s front on it, really killed it. But we wanted to have this be much more energy efficient. And so what was great is they ripped the front out of it, and they actually put the Welcome Center so that it's underground. So they dug out the hill, put it underground so that it was almost entirely cooled by the ground itself. And made this beautiful glass exterior, which really brings in almost entirely natural daylight. What they do is they actually pipe the water from the sinks and from the cafe that's in the bottom underneath the sidewalk at the front, so that they never have to put any sort of de-icing stuff on the sidewalk, because the heat of it melts the ice constantly. So there are a lot of amazing tricks to it that we did. It's really, really beautiful. We also have a certified green cafe. So this was a LEED Silver thing. This was the first time that Phipps had ever done anything like this. And so with the Welcome Center, these are the savings that we've essentially had. So 40% less energy, 80% less waste, 200,000 gallons of water. And what was exciting is that there hadn't been any sort of Welcome Center in a public garden done before in the LEED category. So the second phase was to go look at the production greenhouses. So you can imagine at a place that has thousands and thousands of plants that somebody's got to grow them. Right? A lot of the plants that we have at Phipps are actually grown in this area called the production greenhouses, and we rely on a huge myriad of volunteers and staff to grow these things year round. So you're talking about a year and a half out, you're growing plants that are going to go into an exhibit. That's planning ahead. They weren't environmentally friendly, and what we did was working again with a lot of very creative designers and bringing in people from a whole bunch of different disciplines to figure out ways that you can still have a greenhouse that has the least environmental impact possible. So it's great. They're controlled by robots that constantly monitor the temperature of the air outside versus the temperature inside. If you jump back for a sec, all of these greenhouses, so this is number 2 down here. So you've got all these subrooms within these greenhouses. So you're growing desert plants, you're growing temperate plants, you're growing tropical plants, you're growing a whole bunch of different types of things. So each room has different temperature, humidity, conditions that it needs. So there are all these mini sensors in there that actually check the needs of the plants and then the conditions that are outside. And with a mix of robot-controlled ceilings, it opens up and closes relative to the amount of wind that's out there and the temperature. And it also has these things that are called thermal blankets. So it controls the amount of sun that's constantly shining on the blankets or not, and it can keep the heat in different areas. So it's actually really frightening to be standing in here and all of a sudden you're on all these gears turning and you feel like you're in some spaceship because everything is completely monitored by itself. What's exciting, these greenhouses were just up for LEED certification, and we got LEED Platinum certification for them, and no greenhouse has ever had any sort of LEED certification, particularly LEED Platinum, so that was another first for us. And what's great about it is it's 24% more efficient considered standard greenhouses of that size in the area. And then the last major thing that we did before we started the Center for Sustainable Landscapes that I'll talk about in a minute is we have a tropical forest conservatory. So that was built in 2006. And it's a major education space for us. Phipps is, like many greenhouses, it really wants to be showcasing plants that people might not see elsewhere. And what's great is we have a lot of education programs. We talk about plants here, but then you can compare them to other ones there. So beside being a very beautiful building, everything about this, so it didn't exist before, it was added on at the end, it was built very deliberately, so south-facing slopes, so it can maximize the amount of sun that came in. It's deliberately got a slanted roof against, but not only you want to maximize the amount of sun coming in, but during certain times of day, you also don't want to just fry the plants. So we have a mix of the shading going in and out. They also, the roofs open up to allow air to come in and out. What's really neat though is these things, have you guys heard of earth tubes? Anybody know what an earth tube is? No? Okay, so below the hill from this, there are these huge concrete tubes. So earth tubes they've been around for a while now. I'm going to guess about 50 years because I can't remember right now. But they are enormous tubes that are typically 20 inches in diameter and are planted underground. For us, because we're on a slope, one end of the tube sticks out to the side of the slope. It comes underneath this greenhouse, and then the air is diverted up there, and so it's constantly, it's natural air conditioning essentially. So the air inside that tube is cooled. You open up the top of the tropical forest because it gets warmer there in the daytimes in order to control the temperature. So you open that up and you have an automatic vacuum effect. So the hot air goes out and it sucks the cool air that's been stored in those tubes up into the conservatory. So what's exciting is sitting here, you have this natural cooling. It's warm enough for the plants, but it's not ungodly hot in there essentially. So you'll sit on a bench and you can put your hand below the bench where these vents are and you can feel the cool air coming up, and the cool air is actually just coming from the ground. So you guys do need to come to Pittsburgh, and by all means, if you do, shoot me an email and I'd be happy to set you up with somebody to check all this stuff out. But what's great about this is it's a tropical forest conservatory that has no greenhouse effect. And it was really unique, again, revolutionary design. Nothing like this had ever been done before, but it was bringing in a bunch of people from different disciplines saying, this is what we have to do because it's the right thing to do. Let's figure out how we do that then. So the last phase of this 3-scale master plan to really make this a more sustainable institution was creating the new Center for Sustainable Landscapes, which we just moved into 2 weeks ago, which we're very, very excited about. So my whole department moved over there. But we didn't have a major facility for our education programs or research programs. And the current ones and the developing ones. So I wish we owned all these trees behind here, but we don't. So that's the Pittsburgh has a bunch of city park property. And so essentially, right where the lower driveway ends is where our property ends. But that property is an old public works building, which means salt trucks came, they filled up their gas tanks, they did all their stuff with working on their trucks. And so it was considered a brownfield site. So it was a contaminated site, a lot of soil issues, and it had just been sitting there for years and years and years. And so that was the future site of what is now our Center for Sustainable Landscapes. So this was started technically in 2010, and what's great about it is it's now tied in what we started in 2005 with the new Green Welcome Center. So this is what it looks like, and you can really help the environment in really big ways by building a really beautiful, amazing building, or you can do it very small ways. We'll talk about that in a few minutes too. So the Center for Sustainable, it's pretty, isn't it? Yeah, you gotta agree. It's going for multiple different certifications. So not only is it going for LEED Platinum certification, but we're also going after the Living Building Challenge. So how many people have heard of the Living Building Challenge? Anybody? Doesn't look like it. All right. So it's pretty new. It's the last couple of years. I'll get more into that in a second, but we're also going for a Sustainable Sites Initiative, which people consider essentially LEED for landscapes. So with the Living Building Challenge, people refer to the Living Building Challenge as LEED on speed, and you either get it or you don't. So with LEED, you get different numbers of points in different categories, and you can get different levels of certification. With the Living Building, you either get it or you don't. You either satisfied all the criteria or you haven't. And what's different with the Living Building Challenge compared to LEED is that with the Living Building Challenge, you have to have lived in that building for a year. It has to function as you intended it to function with all your staff in there, whatever it is that you're doing, for 1 year before they actually come in and audit you on the energy, the water use, et cetera, et cetera. So it's with LEED, you get the certification right when you move in, and that's it. So it's a hardcore, really stringent criteria. So I can't say we have a living building now. We're hoping to have a living building. We've done everything we possibly can to do that, and there aren't that many living buildings actually in the world at this point. The idea, though, is really that you are creating a building that has pretty much no impact on the environment. And not only is it supposed to have no impact on the environment, so it's supposed to generate its own water, its own electricity on site, clean the water, and ideally you can even clean the water and drink it yourself. Pittsburgh, for us, we were able to be exempt from that criteria because Pittsburgh wouldn't allow us to do it. But we are going to water our orchids with our water, which works out well. But it's also supposed to be beautiful. It's really supposed to take into account the site that you're working on. Ideally, you really want to go in there and clean up a brownfield site and create a new space there. And then really takes into account the people. So looking at the indoor air qualities, not just energy saving, it's looking at how it affects people. Another criteria of the Living Building Challenge is that all of the materials, all the people have to be local. And by local, they say within 200 miles of your space. So you're not bringing in experts from far away. There's the joke that an expert is somebody that lives over 500 miles away. So I guess technically I'm an expert, right? With the Living Building Challenge, it wants you to say you're bringing in local people. You guys are working together across the disciplines. So these are the people that were involved with our new living building. Additionally, all of the materials need to be sourced locally, and ideally within 200 miles. Now again, there have to be exceptions for people that are going for a Living Building Challenge if they've got a reasonable reason for why they can't do something, and then it's an extensive process, but you can get an exemption for a couple of these things. So with us, what's really cool is that the siding that's on that building that's so beautiful, this is a great example, those are old Pennsylvania barns. And so apparently we filled 2 80-gallon drums with nails hand-pulled nails from the Pennsylvania barns. But that's what that is, so it's totally recycled. And what's beautiful about it, some of these barns are hundreds of years old, and they're being put into this building now. The Living Building Challenge has a red list of materials, so these are all materials that are considered to be unhealthy for people and unhealthy for other forms of life. And most things have these materials in them. You know, our pillows have them, and it's amazing what's there. So one of the focuses of the Living Building Institute that created this Living Building Challenge is to try to change the marketplace. So and it's really hard on the people that try to pursue living building because it's really hard to find the materials you need because there aren't that many out there. But these are the types of materials, so none of these materials are in that building. And that includes the rugs, the office space, the cubes that we've got. And the idea with the long run is to change the market, to put pressure on the market to say, we can't have these things in our materials anymore. So all the stormwater, the concept is systems thinking. So all of the stormwater is processed on site. I'm not going to go into detail here, but you can get a sense of how different things have been created. And a lot of this stuff is put underground. We also have a wetland right here, cleaning our water. Essentially, everything does not leave the site, okay? And we're talking about water in the sinks, water in the toilets, anything that we use, essentially, all has to be processed and cleaned here. We have the rain that falls on the site needs to stay on the site. We need to use it in some way or another. So we have a whole mix of reservoirs. So these guys are moving these water reservoirs around. Those are actually underneath the parking lot now, which is great. Another part of the parking lot has permeable paving, so it allows the water to soak right into the ground. We have wetlands that's actually cleaning the water that's coming from our waste tanks, so that the toilets. And then ideally, right, ideally you're able to drink that water, and that's where we can actually drink it for the city codes that we have. Some cities do allow that. We also have a very intricate net zero energy system. So we have a combination of earth tubes again. We also have these things that are 40 feet into the ground that are called, geothermal wells. Too many technical names, right? And they are constantly cooling air and bringing it back up to the site. We have photovoltaic arrays. Have you guys heard of that phrase? You sound very smart. So not only am I an expert because I'm more than 500 miles away, but I can use the word photovoltaic array. So I showed up as a wildlife ecologist and an environmental educator. I thought photovoltaic array. Wow, I have no idea what that means. It's just solar panels. Okay. So now you can use the word photovoltaic array, and people will think that you're an expert. But the majority of the energy that we're getting for this site is from a wide range of solar panels. So that's in B. Those sections in B essentially are an enormous amount of solar panels. We also have a vertical axis wind turbine. So we can't stick an enormous wind turbine in the middle of the city, for one. And then vertical axis wind turbines essentially look like a twisted rotini noodle vertically. That is also supposed to be friendlier for birds and bats. We have a whole mix of stuff that's going on. But in addition to that sort of thing, we have created the buildings so that it's maximizing the amount of light that comes in, and also is maximizing natural ventilation so that you're not using energy for those sorts of things. It's an exciting thing for an employee because you can actually open the windows. I mean, how novel is that to be in a city? You can actually physically open the windows. And everybody, we have a whole bunch of different light, energy efficient equipment that we use. And we've also learned that you don't necessarily need to have tons of electric staplers. So then it's working with the employees to say, well, do you really need this? How about we do this in a more energy efficient way? Why don't you buy this coffee maker versus this coffee maker? And so it's not just building the building. It's a huge endeavor for us to learn how to work in this building. And then it also makes us realize, oh, I guess I really didn't be doing this thing at home either. This is more natural ventilation. So these are all different components of, I knew I had a picture in there. That's your rotini noodle wind turbine. It's called a vertical axis wind turbine. So what's exciting is even in Pittsburgh, which is second to Seattle as far as overcast days, we're still able to pull in enough solar energy to run this place, which is impressive. And those are things that you don't realize. That's why you should wear sunscreen, because sun still comes through. So this is the plan. So for the FIPS, the Center for Sustainable Landscapes is nearly 25,000 square feet for an office building of similar size. This is the expected reduced energy consumption that we'll have for it, so about 80% less, which is pretty fantastic. Again, we talked about this, but really, we're taking, what's really, really cool is that we are taking the wastewater from this building, and since we can't drink it, we're rerouting it all the way up. It goes to something called a solar distillation unit, so it's this really creative guy created the ability to, I think I have a picture of it. Let me jump here for a second. They look like that. So it's literally distilling water and cleaning it that way, and then we're going to pipe it back down to where the orchids are to water them. And there you go. With that, this is the expected daily water usage that we have for this building compared to an office building of the same size. So a whole lot less because we're constantly reusing it in every aspect possible. Again, we moved in here 2 weeks ago. We'll see if we really succeed, but this is the plan, and hopefully we get it, right? taking into account the people is we really try not only for energy purposes, but for all of these reasons. Looking at human health again, right? It's really, really, really hard. And I know probably a lot of people who have been ecologists in the past have had offices in the basement of their building. They go crazy after a while. So there's increasingly more research out there about obviously contact with nature and how that affects people's health. And so not only was this building built in such a way that it was maximizing the amount of natural daylight to reduce energy use, it was also for human health, right? We were thinking about the well-being of the people that were in there. And so it was drawing a lot of different people's research on the areas of human health, which years ago, when people were really talking about environmental issues, weren't necessarily thinking about the people in the picture. And so this was another way of pulling people into the picture. Similarly, we've got plants throughout the building, and that's for clean air plants. People have heard the term clean air plants. Plants actually do clean the air. And they reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the building. And then there's increasingly more research out there about plants being in workspaces and schools, et cetera, to reduce the amount of stress that's going on. And so for that reason, plants have been put in there as well. And with this fantastic project that we've done, I really want to stress it brought in such a cross-disciplinary team of people to do it. So for living building, it really requires what's considered cross-disciplinary team. We do these things called charrettes, where you bring everybody to the table at the beginning. So the people that want to use the building, instead of saying, okay, we want a building, somebody builds a building, and then you bring the people who are going to deal with the water aspects, and then the people who are going to deal with the energy. Everybody's brought to the table at once. And so there's a lot of upfront frustration, costs, and necessity and communication, but knowledge from across the board. You know, I mean, they bring the artists and the educators. So these are all technically the building people, but it was everybody who was planning on using this building so that there could be communication where everybody could say, you know, if you move this window over 4 feet, this would enable me to do something with the water here. Or you've got the educators there saying, well, that's great, you know what, but all our kids are going to be over here, so is there any way we can do that? And so it was a lot of going around and around saying, what's this building really going to be used for? And it really created, you know, this cross-disciplinary team, but it required creativity. It's like, here's a problem, we've got to figure out how to solve it. And so that's what's so great about liberal arts education. You can do this sort of thing. With sustainable sites, so living building, you know, we talk a lot about the building, but there's actually a landscape around it. And sustainable sites requires that in a city, there's a lot of landscaping that goes on. This is saying you've got to bring all of your plants from a local area, right? We're trying to promote insect biodiversity, animal biodiversity, really keep a local landscape. And we work a lot in the landscaping business, and we have a huge program trying to get people to understand that you don't want to just be sticking pesticides all over your lawn. This could be a wonderful wildlife habitat. So that's what we're doing with the area around the building. And again, plants have to be native. And native, we're saying within 250 miles. And we deliberately created, so you have a bunch of subsets of essentially operating ecological components. And we had the educators involved. So originally you could just have landscape architects come in and say, okay, we have this list of plants that hits this criteria of mileage, and stick them in there. But again, to be cross-disciplinary, we pulled the educators in, and we said, well, actually, we really want kids to understand about their native plants. So let's look at this list of plants that are there and figure out the ones that we could use in our education programs. How about we pick of all these ones and have ones that are medicinal use, that are edible, that we can use very easily in crafts, and talk about the history of people using one particular plant to create artwork. And so again, by bringing people from a bunch of different aspects into the conversation at the beginning, and not just having a scientist who knew that this plant was native, but bringing in a historical artist who said, actually, so-and-so used these plants at such and such time. It created a much richer experience for everybody involved, and it really will help people that are from the city of Pittsburgh understand about the plants that are there, and not just that it's wildlife habitat. You know, you can actually grow this too at the same time, and you can eat it, or you can use it in art. So it's this very creative thinking that was necessitated in order to do the best job we possibly could. So we're really excited because these plants will actually be grown enough by the summer that we'll be able to run all of our programs out of the, we have an outdoor classroom too, which we're really excited about. So with this building, you can build an amazing building, but you don't necessarily do a good job of telling people why this building's important and what they could do in their everyday lives. So we brought in an environmental interpreter, and he's worked enormously not only with the signage but also with my staff to look at ways that you can really be creating educational programs around it. Monitoring the building and being able to have people learn about how the building is operating. And we have spent a lot of time with our existing education programs and making sure that all of them align to these three core areas that we have: conservation and sustainability, the connection between the arts and sciences, and then healthy living. And it's been an interesting ride the last couple of years. So instead of just traditionally teaching plant-based classes and that's it, we've made sure that everything from very young kids. In my department, we oversee programs that are essentially 18-month-olds and their parents, with camp situations to the school field trip programs to an extensive outreach program to schools where we have 42 high school and middle schools involved currently year-round in learning about local environmental issues, but also hitting the state standards in literally everything: writing, science, art, communication, politics, math, you name it, and getting them to learn about the environment, what they can do towards it. But we in my department go all the way from these young kids through middle school, through high school, to funding graduate students who are doing, so PhD students who are doing plant-based research in conservation issues, ethnobotany, which is another fancy word, right? But it's looking at medicinal uses of plants, people's uses of plants, and we focus specifically on medicinal uses. And these PhD students are at universities around the country and doing field work, either very locally in the Pittsburgh area all the way to places like Nepal and Thailand. And we bring them in and we train them in how to connect their science to the public. So they have to, they go through very fun time doing photography workshops, they do science poems, they do radio interviews with hundreds of high school students that we bring in. They give public lectures, they give these 4-minute lightning talks, they create educational signage on site. So everybody is learning, that the casual public, these middle school kids and high school kids that are involved with them, but then the scientists themselves, because they're doing so much critical work, but not necessarily being able to communicate to other disciplines. So these are just samples of the types of people that we impact. One of the really exciting programs is because I've been very acutely aware of social issues, and that a lot of kids don't necessarily have opportunities, because we work with, we have a paid high school science internship program where kids that are eligible for the free lunch program from the city of Pittsburgh can come and work for 6 weeks with the science education and horticulture staff. And they learn not only of ways that they can grow their own food in the city, they learn a bunch about science careers, and then they work also in our education programs, understanding that connecting younger kids to nature is really important. And not only have we twisted the program in such a way that they're also working with kids from similar backgrounds. So we bring in younger kids from organizations that have homeless shelters, food pantries, et cetera, et cetera. And these older kids from similar backgrounds can now teach these younger kids about cool stuff that they can do related to window box gardening and the importance of nature art, things like that. So it's really exciting to see how much has evolved over the last couple of years. These are our scientists learning how to take aesthetically pleasing pictures of their research and then creating art exhibits about that. And these are some of our kids from our outreach programs. But we also are building programs that really focus not on plant-based research. A lot of botanic gardens are primarily plant-based research programs, so you can deal with issues of environmental problems by growing more plants that are potentially endangered. But we have a real opportunity by being in the city of Pittsburgh, surrounded by people having thousands of public come in and thousands of people that we affect outside. We're also right across the street from the University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon University, the Carnegie Museum of Natural History and Art, et cetera, so people across a broad range of disciplines, where we really want to focus our organization on research that's related to people in the environment, not just the environment, but really saying we have an opportunity now and we have a real need to be looking at the human elements of it. So that's the area of work that we're focusing on. And so particularly is looking at, all right, Phipps is a botanic garden in the city. Let's look at people's connection to nature and built environments and what we can do that not only increases the health of the environment there, but also increases the health of the people. So it's both physical and psychological well-being that we look at. And these are various collaborative projects that we've got going on with the organizations. So I'm going to jump back and say, in some ways, I do think I am actually able to follow these people and what they were doing. And it's exciting to see that, because for years and years, I always was told, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I really would say, don't be pigeonholed, even if you don't know the answer to what you want to do with your life, that's okay. And if anything, the bottom line is, don't just think outside the box, because there's such huge environmental and societal problems right now. But not only don't, versus, think outside the box. You know what, forget the box. The box doesn't even exist. I'd say refuse to get into the box in the first place. And that's the kind of thing that we need going forward.
Can you elaborate on how you are each of those three people?
How I'm each of those three people? Okay. I constantly, in everything I try to do, and we try to do that with our education programs, is ask people, what good are you doing with your life? So desperately looking around. So Mother Teresa was great in the fact that she was constantly aware of other people's needs and not thinking about herself. So everything we try to do in our programs is saying, don't just think about your needs. First look around and see other people's needs. And we're really trying to drive the organization so that it's much more a socially relevant organization, because Pittsburgh is an area that has a lot of poverty. So Phipps historically wasn't like that. And we're really trying to make it so that we're working more in the city with the people there. Henry David Thoreau went to Walden because of the beauty and the solace of nature. And Phipps is not a big education organization historically. It was created to be beautiful. And one of the things often that people talk about is the value of nature is, okay, it is edible, it supports all its wildlife habitat, et cetera. Well, what about just the beauty of it? So we focus a lot about the beauty of nature in itself, the beauty of people living in harmony with the environment. And then a jet fighter pilot, because there's been a huge need to change the way environmental education is done. And I've learned that if you keep persevering, you can't, and you don't allow yourself to get pigeonholed, and you understand that you have backgrounds that aren't necessarily traditional to other people, if you push through, you really can lead a revolution. It's exciting to see how much is changing in the botanic garden world based on that. So that's what I think.
Yeah, could you elaborate on some of the costs of these buildings? You had comparisons of, we'll save this much water for a building like this if we had built it sort of traditionally. How long will it take to recover some of these costs?
Typically it's about twice the cost of a normal building. Sometimes it can be more than that. Normally the turnaround time for when you would see those costs made up would be to 10 years. One of the things with these types of buildings is they talk a lot about the upfront costs, and then long term it's going to even out. My director has this great phrase. He says, you know what, but it's the right thing to do one way or another, so we've got to figure out how to raise the money to do this because the tide has to change. So, thank you.